his thoughts as black as the clouds above him. And Ada was becoming a problem. It was expected, of course, but Ro hadn't thought it would happen so quickly, and stunts like the one he'd just pulled with the electrified mask would only work so many times. Dowtons valued strength above all things. Thrown out of their family nest at an early age, the brutes were forced to fend for themselves or die trying. Bigger always meant better for their kind. And Pan was one of the biggest Dowtons he had ever met. Nearly 200 kilograms of solid muscle, one for every year Ada's life. There was no way Ro could beat the Tempest Runner in a fight, so he was forced to show his superiority in other ways, hence the trick with the mask. If he survived, Pan would be shamed into obedience, at least for a little while longer, and if he didn't, well, perhaps it was time to disband the Tempest altogether, to combine the Nihil into one force, headed by Ro alone. Lorna and Zetar would be given new positions of power, of course, relative to his own, but a new structure would solve further insubordination. Ro's father should have restructured the Nihil years ago, but for all his so-called strengths any. Asgar had never WCH was probably why he was dead. For all Ro knew, Pan had been the one who had turned the knife in his father's back, not Kassav as he had originally thought. Ro's eyes flicked up to the gaze electric, hovering high above the forest, a constant reminder of his sovereignty even when he was off-world. Asgard had loved that ship and all it represented, a relic of a bygone age. But Ro had an even older relic, and one that would be more effective than any laser bank or torpedo launcher. Now, Ro? Ro, wait up! Ro had half expected Pan's voice to echo over the rain-soaked courtyard, and yet it was a high-pitched squeak that stopped him in his tracks. He turned to see Kisma Utterson hobbling toward him as fast as the rotund doctor's mechanical leg could carry him. Even though they had worked together for months, the Chadra fan was still something of a mystery to Ro. He had seen Utterson conduct the most brilliant experiments, constructing torture devices so exquisite they would make a Guldarian salivate, and yet the diminutive surgeon lurched around on a rusty old prosthetic liberated from a one-to-one a medical droid. You would have thought the bat-faced doctor would have built himself something a little more efficient, but Utterson cared little for elegance, as his filthy lab coat and greasy fur ably demonstrated. Only the work mattered. Ro liked that, admired it even, whatever his first impressions of the Chadra fan had been. Plus, such undivided focus meant that there was little chance of Utterson betraying him, unlike the others. Not many people would dare talk to Ro like that, but he let it pass. Utterson was excited, his mismatched eyes peering through smeared pupil forever blown, the result of a failed experiment years before Ro had become aware of the scientist's particular talents. Glasses? 1. It did. That seemed to please the Chadra fan, who chirped happily, was completely overwhelmed by the experience. Utterson licked already moist lips. Excellent. Did he survive? Unfortunately not. The scientist nodded as if this were the most natural thing in the world. A pity, but the subject is ready for testing. Ro put a hand on the Chadra fan's shoulder. Patience, my friend. We need to take our time. There is no telling what damage the defrosting process could cause. Utterson removed his glasses, wiping the lenses absently with calloused thumb. Of course. Once I have the dimensions of the ice block, I can fabricate a heating rig. A heating rig for what? Ro withdrew his hand at the sound of the voice. He turned to see Pan marching across the exercise yard, flanked on both sides by his fellow Tempest runners, Zetar's hydraulics steaming in the cold rain. The Talpini had picked up a studded battle hammer. Interesting. Perhaps Ro had misjudged the antagonism between the two runners. A pity. At least none of Zetar's Nihil seemed to be around. Not least, Pan's own ship, the Elegencia, was standing nearby, members of Ada's crew playing sabacc beneath its massive hull. They also looked from the cards, hearing the edge in their runner's voice. Up yet, act. The Dowatin looked past Roe and Utterson at the squall spider. Just where did you take that old heap, Roe? All will be revealed, Roe said, glancing down at Pan's hands, his jaw clenching as he saw the twisted remains of his mask in the Dowatin's massive hands. Why wait? Pan said, throwing his arms wide so everyone could. Down to his sides, but the challenge in his voice remained. Why you old no one where you were going? He told me. Roe tried not to wince as Utterson piped up, seemingly unaware of the aggression in Pan's tone. For a brilliant doctor, not to mention a talented sadist, the Chandra, Pan could be remarkably dense when it came to reading the room. Well, that's all right then, Pan said with a sarcastic snort. If the bat knows, you might as well tell everyone. Pan's crew were on their feet now, and other Nihil were gathering at the door to the nearest block, attracted by the tension in the air, like bloodflies to fresh meat. We all want to know, don't we? Roe glanced at the other Tempest runners, taking in each of their expressions in turn. Zetar was chewing his lip, a tell that had lost him many a Degato hand over the years, but Lorna was as inscrutable as ever. Roe had no idea what was going on behind that impassive face, with or without her mask. Was the Twi'lek with Pan or with Roe, because that was the line that was being drawn out here in the rain? Ev knew it, the Tempest runners, the gathering crowd, Roe Arioni himself. You know how this works, Pan, Roe said before raising his chin slightly to address everyone in the yard. We all know how it works. When the time is right, I will inform you, and you will inform the storm. The time is now, Pan barked, throwing the two halves of the mask to the ground. They bounced and rolled, an oxygen tube coming loose and flopping down on Roe's boot. He resisted the urge to kick it away. Blast her first, if that was how this was waiting. What are you doing? Roe asked, focusing back on the Dowit and keeping his voice steady. Sided with Pan, Roe would be deal weapon. For all the Jedis don't react, he told himself. Don't yell. Just stare her down. Stare into the barrel of the gun. Let no one see your fear. What we should have done a long time ago, Pan told him. Interesting. Roe turned to Zetar. And you are with them? The Tempests united. I stand with the storm, the Talpini replied, the battle hammer held tight in the power suit's hands. I am the storm, Roe reminded him. You used to be, Pan sneered. Things are going to change, Roe. Things have to change. He stomped forward, kicking Roe's broken mask aside. You've done much for us, that I grant you. You have brought us together, given us the pass. My pass, Roe reminded him. Pan stared him down. Are you sure about that? Roe felt his blood turn to coolant in his veins. He didn't ask Pan what he meant. He didn't have to, because the Dowatin hadn't finished, not by a long shot. We know, Roe. We know about the old woman hidden on your ship. We know she gives you the paths. Then she'll give them to us just as easy. Not without my authority. That was a mistake. Roe knew it from Pan's triumphant grin as soon as the words were out. He just confirmed Marisan Tekka's existence in front of everyone. Pan waited, not saying a word. Roe should have finished him off when he had the chance. And what are you going to do, kill me? Storm the gaze? The Dowatin made a show of considering this. It's a thought, or you have no idea what I can offer. Then tell us, Pan bellowed, throwing his hands wide. Explain why the storm needs an eye. Why we shouldn't take everything from you. This time, Pan didn't give him time to respond, turning to the horde of Nihil who were looking more interested by the minute. Because we could, couldn't we, my friends? We could take the gaze, we could take your old woman with pots in her head, and then what would we have? Certainly not someone telling us that we have to cower in the back of beyond. We could be out there, writing our names across the stars. Are you with me? A few of the crowd shouted back, mostly from Pan's and Zetar's Tempest, but enough of Lorna's warband to be a concern. Are you with me? Roe needed to act. And what then? Pan tensed at Roe's voice, raised just enough to echo around the former exercise yard. Where exactly are you going to strike first? Pan turned back to him, a sneer stretched across that ugly, smug face. Anywhere we want, The title was an insult, not a tribute. What are you going to do now? Wheezed a voice in the back of Ro's head, a voice that needed to be silenced along with the others. Now I win, Ro thought back. Maybe you've forgotten how it is done. Marthion Ro took a step forward, addressing not the Tempest Runner, but the Nihil in all their number. Pan is right. Of course he is. You could strike, like he ordered over Cycler, where Starbreaker and every member of his cloud died at the Jedi's hands. The Dawotan's sneer turned into a scowl, but Ro didn't give him a chance to respond. You could take the gaze electric, squeezing every last path from the Oracle, the woman who has been loyal to my family for centuries. There was no going back now. The Nihil knew of Mari Santeca's existence, but he'd be damned if they knew her true name or what she could do. Because then you would have nothing, said the voice. But Ro knew that was a lie. He had all he needed. The Oracle has served me well, he continued. She has served the Nihil through me and my vision. Vision, Pan scoffed. What vision is that? But no one was looking at the Dawood. All the Nihil were looking at Ro. Pan didn't yet realize his error in trying to usurp Ro with an audience, or at the least waiting before firing a shot. The only way he could have won was to shoot Ro in the back before Ro even knew that Pan was there, but, as always, the Dawotan was more concerned with showboating than actually seizing control. It would be his undoing, maybe not now, in this moment, but soon enough. One thing was certain. Ro had the Nihil and wasn't about to let them go. Not to Pan, not to anyone. You ask me where I've been? I've been out there, Ro continued, pointing up into the gathering clouds above their heads. In the very stars Pan wants to burn, the stars we all want to burn. And do you know what I've seen? The Republic, the Jedi, her. Pan snorted, ready to shout Ro down, but instead, Lurin spoke up, asking the question he had planted in all their heads. Who, Ro? Who is out there? The Twi'lek hadn't drawn her blaster. Her hand still rested on its grip, but Ro knew where her loyalties lay, with whoever was stronger, and Ro was about to prove he was the strongest of all. His head high, the eye of the Nihil uttered 3 powerful words. Chancellor Lina So. Everything that woman does is an affront to our way of life. She comes into our systems, he said, thumping his chest to punctuate the words, our territories, our space, tells us how to live, how to think. And so we strike back. We strike time and time again. We smash her hyperlanes, ravage her worlds, kill her Jedi. And what does Lina So do? She laughs at us. She taunts us. We strike at her, and yet her republic grows day by day. Again, he pointed to the sky. I've seen it for myself. Even now, Lina So is planning a spectacle to end all spectacles, the Republic Fair. Millions of her advocates, her followers, her sheep, arriving from every system to march beneath her colors. And not just the Republic. Their allies, even their enemies, are invited. The Mon Calamari, the Togrutas, and why? So their numbers continue to swell. So their influence grows, but I say no, no more. Ro paused, letting his cry echo around the square before making a solemn vow. They didn't invite the Nihil, but by the stars we will be there, and we will crush the real enemy, the symbol of their hope and their resilience. Death to the Chancellor, he cried out in conclusion, punching the air with a fist. Death to So. The chant went up, the warband seizing on his words in an instant, Zetar leading the chorus like the good little soldier he was. Death to So. Finally, Lorna drew her blaster, swinging it up, not to shoot Pan or Ro, but to fire bolt after scarlet bolt into the sky as she too joined the throng. Death to the Chancellor, death to So, death to the Chancellor, death to Sa. Only one being stood unaffected by the fervor, fists clenched and shoulders taut. Kaneda glared at Ro, murder in his eyes. Ro looked back calmly, challenging the Daoitan to make good on his threat. But Ro knew he wouldn't. He couldn't, not with the Nihil firmly behind their eye. Instead, all Ada could do was join the rest of the retinue, bloodless lips barely moving as the camp reverberated to Ro's cause. Death to the Chancellor. Death to So, death to the Chancellor. Death to So, death to the Chancellor. Death to So. Lonisa City Spaceport, Valo. The day had finally come, after years of planning. The opening of the Republic. Fair. Stellan stood, his eyes closed, considering using the Force to quite literally take the weight off his feet. He hadn't stopped since morning meditation, accompanying the Chancellor here, there, and everywhere, as the final preparations had been made. Feeling it too, eh? Stellan opened his eyes at the sound of the voice. Elzar Mann stood in front of him. What I wouldn't do for a dip in that lake. For a moment of peace and quiet, Stellan agreed. They were back at the spaceport, along with every other official on the planet, Stellan in his temple robes, Elzar still, notably, in his day-to-day garb. But Mann's face was beaming, which was a distinct improvement from the day before. You'd spent too much time in temples, Elzar said, breathing in the air as if he savored the reek of fuel. I was worried when I was first posted here. That's an understatement. He was right. Of course, even the Atmos City sphere was electric, and Elzar, more so than any Jedi Stellan had ever met, was affected by his surroundings. Others saw it as a failing, but Stellan knew it as the way man connected to the Force, how he thought the way he did. They really weren't that different, although Elzar seemed to have less of an issue with the cam droids that swarmed around them like bloat bottles. Stellan had coped with Real Darrow's cam on the Coruscant Dawn, gotten used to it even, but an army of the things was a different matter. Stellan glanced over to the media corps, who huddled behind barriers to the side of the Chancellor's party. Real was among them. She had clearance to be with the official welcoming committee, but had chosen to join her fellow reporters. A diplomatic move? Maybe, although Stellan suspected the young woman was keeping her ear to the proverbial ground, on the lookout for new leads. She was a shrewd customer and belonged in this world, while Stellan was feeling surprisingly out of his depth. Everyone thought he was taking this all in his stride. He knew what the others thought of him. Most of his close friends teased him often enough. Stellan Gios likes the sound of his own voice. Stellan Gios can't get enough of the limelight. All of that couldn't have been further from the truth. Elzar was right. Stellan had spent most of his career in temples, teaching, advising, coaxing Elzar and Avar. They were the pioneers, they were the explorers. He was a mentor, not used to the public gaze, no matter how the Order positioned him as the bright young thing on the council, an example to all. He didn't particularly like it. But if it was the will of the Force, who was he to argue or complain? The Jedi were supposed to be an example, a guiding light. He could take this as the opportunity it was. The bless. As if to test his new resolve, a cam droid dropped down in front of his face, its lenses zooming in for a close-up. Real's droid, T9, Stellan. Don't worry, Zar whispered worry. Elzar whispered as the party shuffled itself into lines that Samara had preordained. You'll be out of the crux soon enough. Man fielded his eyes to gaze up at the landing. Yes, all eyes will be on her. The shuttle was certainly beautiful, its hull long and tapered, L-wings swiveling up as the landing rig silently deployed. Its hull gleamed like polished bronzium, the engines all but silent as it gently touched down. Was all well at the hotel? Stellan asked, adjusting his cloak. Everything checked out. Again, Elzar didn't even try to disguise the irritation in his voice. Do you know how many times Tis asked me to sweep the royal suite? And that's after the Valos Occur Force gave the place the thumbs up. He's just being thorough. That's one word for it. The others are beneath the Jedi. Stellan tried to suppress the smile that tugged at his lips. I'm GL, you realize. The important thing is that the Regassa feels safe. Yes, Master. Thank you, Master. Oh, shut up. They both fell quiet as the ramp began to descend. Chancellor S stepped forward, her Targon staying obediently where they were busy her son. Kitrep So looked as uncomfortable as Stellan felt in the Gela of the cam droids, but, as Elzar predicted, every lens immediately shifted to the figures emerging from the shuttle. First came guards carrying traditional Shillian weapons, the lawn barbed pikes known as Kiavani. The soldiers were dressed in long tunics, their faces hidden beneath near featureless masks that we framed by their montrals, the distinctive horns capped with silver plying. Moving in unison, they marched forward, only to sharply daub, bowing her descent. Elric attention, a vision in long, Yovit was simply stunning. Her skin flawless orange and her montrals adorned with delicate golden metalwork that glinted in the sunlight, similar but far more ornate than the ear cuffs worn by the Valons. Her long head tails hung down in front of her shoulders, past the high collar with its fur detailing and the heavy chain that marked her high office. Regassa of Philly, supreme huntress of the United Tribes, ruler of Togrutas far and wide. Time seemed to stand still as she approached the Chancellor, her guard falling in beside her. The two women appraised each other, as was the Togruta way, before So finally spoke. Most High Regassa, I welcome you to Valo, a proud member of the Galactic Republic. Terra Makane Varanumaranar. Stellan was impressed. So's mastery of Togruti was flawless, no doubt the result of many hours of practice with various protocol droids. And there was no mistaking the look of respect on Eloric's face as she returned the traditional greeting. Terra Suten Kur Minera Narak. May the Force guide your path. May the Force bring you home. Home, specifically the Togruta homeworld of Shilly, had been the biggest stumbling point when the Republic had first ventured into Togruta space nearly 150 years earlier. Members of the species were fiercely protective of their world and its surrounding moons, considering the ground beneath their bare feet sacred. Stellan glanced down. Sure enough, the Regassa wore no shoes. Most Togrutas wore boots when they were off-world, but the High Huntress always went barefoot wherever she was. He'd never met her, of course. Few in the Republic had. Those early encounters hadn't gone well. The Togrutas had known about the Republic for centuries, just as the Republic had known about Togrutas. There had been a mutual respect, many such as Yora Mali even leaving the Togrutas' home planet to become Jedi Hutt Havoc, later. But here was the Regassa, standing on a Republic world, the official guest of the Chancellor. Stellan knew how important this meeting was to So's plans. Having the Togrutas join the Republic was the culmination of what the media delighted in calling her great works, a lifelong ambition that she would do everything in her power to realize before her term of office came to a conclusion in 4 years' time. Here we go, Elzar muttered beneath his breath, as the monarch was led along the line of dignitaries, bowing to each and every one as they were introduced. Stellan felt a stab of irritation. Couldn't Elzar take anything seriously? It was fine back when they were Padawans, even young Jedi Knights, but now the eyes of the galaxy were upon them. Quite literally, as it happened. Stellan felt a bead of sweat roll down his back, and for a moment considered that Elzar had been right, not to wear his heavy temple robes. Before long, Elorec was in front of him, being introduced by the Chancellor. Lord Jedi, the Regassa said, using an honorific that the Jedi themselves hadn't to use for millennia, but the Togrutas refused to let slip into antiquity. I see from your raiment that you are a member of the Council on Coruscant. I am, Your Majesty. Then you knew my great friend Jora Mali. I miss her terribly. She was a wise and honorable Jedi who now dwells in the Force. Regassa Elorec nodded sagely. Of course. I had hoped to visit her station, Starlight Beacon. Another nod, the gems on Yovit's headdress catching the sunlight. Maybe you should, Eldar cut in without waiting to be introduced. I'm sure Marshal Chris would be happy to welcome retinue. You, in war. Montessa Chekhov's ship was spotless. This, Ty Yorick could appreciate. Her own ship, now safely docked on Port Halep, was old, but it was never messy. Ty was a firm believer in a place for everything and everything in its place. It was one of the few things that she and her admin droid agreed on. The Dynamo, however, was something else. An army of tiny droids was constantly rolling from deck to deck, polishing and sanitizing until every console gleamed, and the filtered air smelled like a med center. Considering her obvious predilection for cleanliness, it came as no surprise when Montessa had taken one look at Ty's ship and insisted that they traveled on the Dynamo, much to the chagrin of both KL-03 and Ro-VR, who had whined like the lovelorn puppy the astromech so often resembled. If she was honest, Ty appreciated the break from both droids, although she was beginning to worry that she'd be decontaminated if she stood in one place for too long. The gig had been a simple one. Montessa wanted a bodyguard. That was fine. Ty had performed enough babysitting gigs. They were largely without incident, and if things did take a turn for the worse, she could. Flat out refused. And then Ty had heard where they were. Not Valo. Not the Republic Fair. She didn't mind the crowds, and she certainly didn't mind the weather. But there was no way in this reality or the next that Ty was going to a planet that would be crawling with Jedi. Of course, KL had other ideas and had pointed out how the stabilizer still needed to be fixed, and the fuel intermixers, and the entire sensor array, and just about everything else for that matter. Ty had allowed herself to be swayed by the droid's logic, known in other parts of the galaxy as incessant nagging, and now found herself studying maps of Lonisa City, her eyes wandering repeatedly to the partially completed Jedi outpost near the Republic Fair site. Yes, their lack of credits was the only reason she was going near that thing. Definitely not the tiny voice in the back of her head kept telling her that this was the path she was supposed to tread. Why did she get the feeling KL wasn't the only force in the universe that wouldn't take no for an answer? Would you like something to drink? Ty ground her teeth. She'd been asked the same question at least 4 times since the ship had taken off. Trying not to sigh, she glanced up at the girl standing on the other side of the holodeck. Montessa's daughter, Claren, looked to be about 20 years old, and was as meek as her mother was commanding. There were other differences, too. Unlike Montessa, Claren had a strip of closely cropped hair running from her brow to an admittedly elegant neck. Ty wondered what her mother thought of that, or how Claren had avoided having one of the cleaning droids shave it off while she slept. As acts of defiance went, it wasn't the most rebellious, but it displayed at least a glimmer of individuality in what was otherwise quite a timid creature. Claren spent most of her time playing with the oversized bangles she wore on her wrist. Of course, there were also although, exploring the option in another time or place, but this wasn't the moment, especially with the daughter of a client, who was still very much an unknown quantity. Ty flicked off the map and sat on the table. A nearby cleaning droid let out a worried beep, but she ignored it. She'd changed pants before she'd come aboard. Montessa had insisted. So, she said, turning on charm that she rarely required, do you? Claren flushed, spinning that damn bangle around her wrist. What? Claren breathed out, obviously a little relieved. Every now and then, she said, especially when we're going somewhere dangerous. That was a new one. Somewhere dangerous? Like the Republic. Claren looked flustered. I just go where my mother goes, and your mother is a businesswoman? An inventor, Ty repeated, as if Claren were the most fascinating RL in the world. And is that why we're going? To Valo? To demonstrate ER inventions at one of the pavilions? Claren took a tentative step forward, warming to the conversation. No, we have an important meeting with a potential investor. An investor in what exactly? Ty raised a hand. You don't have to one, but your mother was, shall we say, a little vague on the details. I'm just supposed to stand around looking impressive. Not that she was much the wiser when Claren led her to the dynamo storage bay, making a connection with another living being, even if it was for ulterior motive, but hey, a guard needed to know what she was guarding. This is it? I asked, frankly a little disappointed. OB, it's my mother's pride and joy, Claren admitted, sounding a little sad. Ty couldn't see why. The big blue crate was pretty nondescript, polished to a shine, obviously, but standard all the same, like countless other crates in countless other storage bays. It was tall, coming up to her chest, but had no markings whatsoever to indicate what lay inside. Can I have a peek? Ty asked, pushing her luck. Go. We probably shouldn't, Clarence said. In fact, we should probably. Ty cocked her head. You're not going to offer me another drink, are you? The bangle went around the girl's wrist again. It's just my mother doesn't like anyone getting close to it. Something about the way she said it made Ty's phantom tendril prickle. It? Why? The warmth dropped from her voice. It's not dangerous, is. Most definitely not. Clarence spun around at the sound of Montessa's voice. The inventor was standing in the door of the storage bay, her ever-present sanitizer ball hovering beside her even on the ship. Mother, I was just... Montessa didn't let her daughter finish, barely giving her another lance as she strode in, her focused target locked on Ty, which is a question, but one that is surely acceptable, considering the situation. That we're heading to a location where there are going to be WFO a lot of people. And that worries you? I would rather know what I am getting into. Montessa considered this. And for a second, I wondered if she'd about to find herself dropped off at the next spaceport. Instead, Montessa laughed humorlessly. I like you, Ty. Ty wasn't sure she could repay the compliment. You'll have to forgive me, Montessa continued, pointing a Pete Eckley trimmed fingernail at the crate. I've put everything we have in Hatbox. I have become a little guarded about it. Ty raised her eyebrows. Well, now you have me to guard it. Indeed I do, and while I hope you'll forgive me if I keep some rats close to my chest, you should probably know what will be required of you when we meet our potential benefactor. She paused, vest falling to Ty's waist, specifically her holster. Now Ty's missing tendril was really starting to itch. Would you like something to drink? Montessa asked, indicating Eudor. I have a number of questions about that lightsaber's... 1. The Unity Arc Valo. The crowd gasped as a drift of vectors streaked overhead, lying in perfect formation. Stellan had to admit that it was the perfect ND to a perfect afternoon. Ragasa's arrival had gone like moon lockwork, much to the obvious delight of Lena So, and now the Hanseller's entire retinue was standing on a platform in front of literally thousands of people who had gathered in front of the fair gates for the official opening ceremony. Then there were the billions who would watching on the holonet. It truly was a wonder to behold, although that didn't stop Stellan from wishing that he was up there with his fellow Jedi, joining the drift as they dropped into a perfect sunbur escade, one of Nib Asek's favorite maneuvers. Nib was leading the Sea Tours, Buriaga piloting a craft of his own, a recent development years of flying with his master. The Ithorian Jedi Mikhail Sutni had joined them in the air, alongside Master Kunpar of the local PLE. Regasa Elarek burst into applause as the vectors made one last K and sped off into the horizon, the crowd following the Queen's one. Stellan scanned the throng, waiting to flow through the Unity, picking out just a few of the familiar faces in their number. There, who now scoured the galaxy as a seeker, searching for Force-adept youngsters to be trained by the Order, and Nurin Bakarakana, a Frosian Jedi whom Stellan knew by reputation alone. Then there was Torban Buck, the hulking Chagria medic who was famed as much for his bizarre insistence at every on-call, in buckets of blood, as for his medical expertise. Buck saw Stellan looking his way and fired off a jaunty salute, leaving the Count member wondering, if he could return the gesture. Fortunately, the decision was taken out of his hands when So too a step toward the dais where Matari and Voru had been sitting silently throughout the display. "We thank the Jedi," the Chancellor said, resplendent in a lawn gown of nanosilk, her amplified voice echoing off the buildings of Harbor Square. She swept a smile across the crowd, a gesture expert designed to take in as many cams as possible. "It is good to see so many of you here today. Citizens from the core, from the inner and M Rim, and of course here from the frontier, the latest members of O Galactic family." She raised her hands wide, as if she could see the E-Aya Republic in front of her. Maybe she could. "For that is what we are, who we are, a family, many but connect brothers, sisters, guardians, clan kin, loved ones, and friends." But So made a point of turning to Ellerek, seated with Ambassada Sess, her royal guard never far, lined up toward the rear of the platform. Regasa inclined her head in acknowledgement of the sentiment. "Some have traveled far, some are close to home. So continuit. We all are one. We are all the Republic, and this fair is for all, this day is for all of us. Together, we will experience new thin. Next, looking." On the platform turned, Stellan included, to see a squadron of cycler skyhawks sweeping forward, their lights blinking against the sunset, and they weren't alone. Stellan could make out at least 3 vectors traveling alongside it, not part of the display, but ships that had trailed from the shipyards, one of them hopefully being flown by a recovered Belzetafar. This time, however, no one was looking at the vectors. Instead, all were captivated by the breathtaking sight of the innovators sweeping toward them. The hull of Stellan had seen back on Coruscant had been impressive enough, but the ship itself was simply stunning. It was long and tapered, like a pristine arrowhead, its hull as white as a shark boar tusk. Sensors lined a raised area near the rear of the vessel where Stellan knew from the schematics that the operations center was housed, a vast viewport flaring white in the sunlight. It was simply the largest ship Stellan had ever seen, dwarfing both the Coruscant Dawn and the Jedi's own flagship, the Ataraxia. Best of all, the elite-class vessel wasn't a warship or a destroyer. It was a pioneer. After being displayed at the fair, the ship would set out on a voyage to explore in previously uncharted areas of space, the first of a new fleet of science vessels. While Starlight and So's planned network of beacons were there to support and protect, the Innovator and its line would broaden all their horizons. Map. The Republic's starfighters streaked overhead, followed by the vectors. Stellan reached out in the Force as they passed, catching a hint of Indira Stokes' presence, along with the legend that was Porter Engle. There was someone else, someone he had never actually met. A younger Jedi who could only be Belzetafar. So the young Jedi Knight was out of the Bacta tank and back at the controls of a ship, accompanied, Stellan presumed, by the Charhound he had heard so much about. Stellan beamed. This was a good day, not just for the Republic, but for the Jedi as well. Surely now, for all the fear the cycler attack had caused, there would be no doubt that the Runnock had tried to. Once Aga the Force, together they and the Republic could do anything, no matter who opposed them. The light was on their side, now and forever. A cheer went out as the Innovator touched down, the crowd whooping and applauding, drowning out both Skyhawks and vectors that had come about to rocket back toward them. But So's voice was heard, booming over the speakers and transmitted to every planet in the Republic and beyond. "Nothing gives me greater pleasure," she exulted, throwing her arms wide, "than to declare the Valo Republic Fair open. This is our Republic, my friends, our family, the spirit of progress, the spirit of democracy, the spirit of unity." With perfect timing, the combined starfighters streaked overhead as So completed her speech, and the pilots flicked a switch in their cockpits. Colored smoke trailed from hidden canisters, painting the sky gold and white as a specially composed anthem blared from speakers across the square. The music swelled, and the Chancellor's platform started to rise steadily into the sky, finally allowing access to the gates that now were embellished with holographic letters, the Chancellor's final words, and the motto for the fair as a whole, writ large for all to see, the spirit of unity. Stellan looked over to the rostrum and saw Lena So watching the people. Her people, streaming into the park with tears in her eyes. Despite everything, despite the dark days following the great disaster, despite being told that the Republic Fair would never happen, she had proved everyone wrong. At that moment, Stellan believed that the Chancellor could do anything. Centuries from now, the people of the galaxy would look back and see this day as a turning point, one that set the Republic's course for all time. And he, for one, was glad that the Jedi were at the heart of it, where they belonged. Jordan breathed in the hot Elfrona air, imagining the smell of Porter Engel's famous 9-egg stew already bubbling in the kitchen, and felt a jab in his neck. He woke to find himself in torment. This, of course, was nothing new. In fact, it had quickly become the norm, the life he had endured ever since he had been captured by Marchion Ro. His broken leg had healed, but pain remained, making it impossible for him to focus, to escape. To call on Bell. I am here, my apprentice. I am still alive. That in itself was debatable. Was he alive? Really? Some days H doubted it. Some days he thought himself insane. He had every right to be. The doctor, that sniveling, crawling, sadistic Chadrafan, killed the other prisoners one by one. Some still in their cells, some I. Indignity burned at him night and day. Helpless as anew, had Engi spent the endless days since his capture in a laboratory, B to a metal rack. A strict regimen of drugs had robbed him of its strength and the ability to sleep. Whenever he began to slip, she had done minutes before. A hypo was pressed against his same click, the same hiss, the same rush through his veins, him awake. Not that he could close his eyes. They had been deep permanently open, his head held in an immovable vice. He turned his neck, couldn't even look away as lights strobed and F him. A shifting kaleidoscope of colors, some he recognized, others seemed new, almost as if he had forgotten their hue. And time, a cacophony of screams and static, was blasted from Floaticers, discordant sounds both organic and synthesized. Loden, one of the speakers during the early days of his confinement, a skiddying moment when he managed to center himself to UT with the Force. He'd squeezed, shattering the unit, shards of Aztec cutting his cheek. That pain he didn't mind. It meant he inged his environment, made a difference. It proved he still had of control. Punishment had come later that night. He knew it would. Ali had expected more than a simple surgical saw in his doctors. Really? That was it? After everything else his captors had done, after the lights and the sounds and the madness, what did he fear from a saw? The answer, it turned out, was nothing. The door had slid open, the lab, and all the time, Rose stood on the other side of the observation window, watching, his dark eyes cold and unreadable. He never entered the laboratory again, never talked to his prisoner. The Chadrafan's squeaking, rasp was the only voice he ever heard, until one day there was another. Who are you? Loden thought he'd imagined it, dreamed it maybe, wondering if the stimulants had stopped working or if he was one step closer to the end. Are you even real? Loden could ask the same of her. I don't know. The Chadrafan had looked up from his datapad when Loden spoke, his notched ears crammed with plugs to protect them from the noise. The voice laughed. Loden liked the sound. It was pleasant, musical, a balm in the midst of horror. I've had the same doubts. I know I used to be real. Once upon a time, a long time ago. The disheveled doctor had limped from the lab. He was standing. I can't. That doesn't sound like you. How do you know what I sound like? I'm not sure I even know anymore. I'm not sure I know a lot more these days. See so much more. Look harder. Yes, master. The lights faded. Loden could see his jailers now. Utterson showing Roe something. Results? Maybe. They're hurting it. Hurting what? Hurting me? No. The Ancient One. It's been hurt before, but not like this. The ice melting away. I don't know what you were talking about. That makes two of us. Another laugh. Keep looking. Loden couldn't focus. He didn't know how. He could see their lips moving, but couldn't make out the words. The final test. A last step along a path. They were talking about something they'd found. Ah Ro had found. The great... What? Betterer? Lessener? What was it? You'll know soon enough. Can you help me? Can you set me free? Of course not, silly. You can only do that for yourself. But the time will come on, when he is near. Then the voice had gone silent, for a day, maybe two. When it and dead. When she returned, she was talking nonsense, a jumble embers and words that meant nothing. But Loden listened all th. The Starlight Pavilion, Valo. Stellan spotted Belzetifar the moment he entered the Starlight Pavilion. The space had seemed vast when he had first seen it on his tour of the fair yesterday, but now it was packed with dignitaries from every corner of the Republic and beyond. They were standing in small clusters, nibbling on snacks delivered by serving droids or gazing in admiration at the spectacular hologram of Starlight Beacon that was turning slowly in the center of the chamber. The most detailed, three-dimensional light display most people had ever seen, Stellan included. It cast the faces of its admirers in a golden light that seemed appropriate for a beacon designed to illuminate the darkest corner of space. Bell entered alongside Indira and Engel, and was immediately set upon by the other veterans of the Etzel disaster, Nib, Buryaga, and Mikkel, who talked animatedly to the young man, Burry looking like he wanted to gather Bell into a well-meaning but potentially bone-crunching hug. All the time, Bell's charhound sat obediently at his feet, looking up at the newcomers and glancing every now and then at her master, as if checking Bell was all right. But was he? The boy was smiling, but the expression seemed tired, forced even. Stellan knew. Have you toured the exhibition, Delegate Ritar? Recovered. The Ardenian shook his head, keen to steer the conversation back to matters of ship maintenance. Oh, you should, Stellan said quickly, catching the eye, or at least the atmosphere helmet, of Archivist Orbelin. It gathers treasures from every major Jedi collection. Absolutely fascinating. Thankfully, Orbelin had taken the hint and stomped over, his movements as fluid as you'd expect from a blob of constantly shifting mucus operating a humanoid spacesuit. Archivist, Stellan said, I was wondering if you could accompany Delegate Ritar around Secrets of the Jedi? I think he would be particularly interested in the Cassadrian Matrix. Of course, Master Geos, Orbelin burbled, a vocoder translating the movements of the slime within the suit into spoken words. It would be my pleasure. Relieved of the conversation, Stellan waited patiently for Orbelin to guide his charge toward the ornate double doors that led to the exhibition. When the coast was clear, Stellan made for Bell and the others, his progress hindered every few steps by delegates wanting to make the acquaintance of a member of the Jedi Council. Stellan made his excuses each time, trying his best not to cause offense, but determined to make it to the group of Jedi before they disappeared into the crowd. Master Geos, Indira exclaimed when he finally drew near. It is good to see you. And you too, Jedi Stokes. I am pleased that the Force led you safely rough the raid. Yaga, not to mention Jock looks Jedi. This is why you should never become a counselor, Engel, Nibasek scolded. I hope your clawfish chowder is better than your bed. Side manner. Engel frowned at the woman, his expression voicing a silent what. So fortunately, Bell raised a hand, waving away any concern. Master Engel is right. I barely made it out alive. Stellan allowed himself breathe again. There was no animosity in Engel's clumsiness, and his lack of tact was as legendary as his lightsaber work. Bell, however, seemed to take it all in his stride, although the pain that had stabbed the boy's heart had been palpable. I wouldn't be here if it weren't for Indira and the arrival of Master Engel's drift. Graceful and diplomatic, Stellan knew at that moment that he was going to like young Zettifar. Would you like to see the exhibition? Stellan asked, Bel's eyebrows raising slightly at the sudden invitation. Yes. Yes, of course. The Padawan turned to his fellow Jedi. Would you like to come? Dingle looked as if he was about to say yes before Indira cut in. No, we need to discuss tomorrow's display. You go ahead. Stellan offered his thanks to Bel's master and guided Zettifar through the throng. It will be a little less crowded there. That would be a welcome change. Bel glanced down at his feet to heck that his charhound was still at heel. I've never seen so many people, at least not in such close quarters. It can be overwhelming, especially after a period in a bacta tank. I'm intrigued to hear about the experience. When I was a Padawan, Master Khan would have us meditate in a sensory deprivation field so he could be truly one with the Force. I assume that it's a similar sense-on. He was in no way as empathetic as Buryaga, but he couldn't help recognizing the emotion. He stepped back to allow Bel to climb the steps to the exhibition doors. They parted obediently, the steward managing entry to the exhibition not likely to turn away a member of the council. Inside, Stellan felt Bel relax, the Padawan's shoulders falling slightly. Bel took a deep breath, spotting a spiral of pink flowers swirling gracefully in a repulsor field. Are those Uneti blossom? Stellan confirmed. From the great tree on Coruscant, Master Wishan has manufactured incense from its petals. I can arrange to have a box sent to you if you'd like. That would be incredibly kind. Not at all. I brought some with me on the Coruscant dawn. I found it invaluable during meditation. He walked the young Padawan toward a cabinet containing a collection of small medallions arranged on velvet pillows. What are these? Bel asked, fascinated by the tiny discs, each marked with a Cormaic rune. Chthonian mastery tokens, Stellan replied, happy to be teaching Gain. A common practice back in the early days of the Order. They were awarded when a Jedi Knight was elevated to the rank of Jedi Master, both to the Jedi Knight themselves and to the Master who had aimed them. Fascinating. Bel was looking down at the display case, but Stellan seemed convinced he was actually looking at the coins. How is your meditation? The directness of the question broke El's trance. He looked up, a flicker of panic on his face, the sharp ocean mirrored by a sudden growl from the charhound. Bel covered. Maybe not, but it's true nonetheless. Back when I was a youngling, I had trouble bonding with animals. I think Master Gidamine was about to give up on me before my final Padawan trials. Bel thought, I'm sure. What happened? I scraped through. Just the truth of the situation was more complex, of course. Stellan had been asked to influence the flight of Abora Finch, but had been failing terribly until Elzar had prodded the Finch with the Force, putting the little yellow and blue bird backtracked. It wasn't exactly cheating, as Jedi were expected to help one another, but neither did it quite meet Gidamine's strict requirements. Fortunately, the old master hadn't noticed. Bel started to wander through the exhibit, not really paying attention to the treasures from 1,000 generations of Jedi. Instead, he seemed preoccupied with Stellan's question, as Stellan had assumed he would be. You asked about my meditation. It has been difficult since the battle, since before then. Ever since Master Loden disappeared, you are struggling to clear your mind, to touch the Force. Bel looked as though he wasn't sure how or even if he should respond. Stellan could understand that. He was talking to a council member after all. The hesitation was the only answer he needed. When Master Kant passed, I also struggled. Yes, even me. Every Jedi, no matter their age or experience, associates meditation with their master. We are taught the basic principles from our arrival in the temples, but it is only when we become Padawans. Kant, and deeply, Kana, to lose your master as a Padawan, that is bound to have an impact, especially with a master like Loden. He was the best of us. Bell pursed his lips as if trying not to let them quake. Yes, he said, his voice cracking. Yes, he was Alice Ad. Stellan reached out, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. It will come back, I promise. That serenity, that peace. Loden is part of the Force now, so in a way the two of you are closer than ever. But in the meantime, you can always come to me. Bell shook his head abruptly, wiping a tear from his eye. No, you have duties. I wouldn't presume. My duty, Stellan reminded him, is to the Order. And the last time I looked, Pato and Zettifar, you were part of that Order. Bell laughed and cleared his throat. Yes. Yes, I am. Then I will hear no more arguments. What is the motto of this fair? The spirit of unity. You'll see it on enough posters over the next few days, but it's true, not just for the Republic, but for the Jedi. For us. No Jedi is ever alone. We are united in the Force. The memory of Elzar guiding the Finch flashed across his mind again, but this time it was followed by a shadow, a sense of trepidation. Master Geos? Bell was searching Stellan's face for answers, concerned at the Count One member's sudden hesitation. Even Ember leapt up, uneasy once more. Is everything all right? Stellan shook his head. No, something is very wrong. The Starlight Pavilion. Council member Geos excused himself and hurried from the exhibition. Not knowing what to do, Bell stood in front of the display cabinets, trying to work out what had just happened. The last day had been so surreal, slipping from the Bacta tank, running his fingers across the synth flesh, over the freshly closed wound in his belly. It felt so strange to the touch, so unreal, as disconnected as Bell felt from the world. Since then, everyone had been buzzing around him like soka flies. The med droids checking to see if his new intestinal implants were operating correctly, Indira never leaving his side. And then there had been Porter Engle. Bell didn't even know when Gruff Ikruki had arrived and wasn't overjoyed when he announced his intention to stay. It was ungrateful, he knew. But, like Indira, Porter reminded him of Elfrona, and Elfrona reminded him of Loden, who was the last person he wanted to think about right now. Especially now. Bell hadn't gotten a moment's peace since the attack, which was why he jumped at the chance to accompany the Innovator into Valo airspace in his Vector. Anything to be alone, except for Ember, of course. The Charhound had been his only comfort as the science vessel, knew that the dog would be just behind him. And the man had said he wasn't good with animals. Why the stars was she following him? He pushed his way through the delegates, apologizing as he stepped both feet and tentacles. So much for the grace and elegance of Jedi on. Meeting Stellan had been as odd as everything else. Bell hadn't known what to do when he saw the council member making a beeline for him. As if meeting Nib, Mikkel, and Burry after all this time wasn't overwhelming enough. He was sure that one of them would notice what he was trying to hide. Maybe Stellan's interruption had been a blessing. At least Geos didn't know him as well. And then there was Alda's stuff about lost masters. It was all Bell could do not to run all the way back to his Vector. Why, in the Republic's name, was Ember leading him back to the man? Bell saw a flash of gray and red just behind Stellan and caught up with the dog moments before she jumped up onto the master's robes. Stellan was back with Indira and the others asking about Anna the Jedi. Have any of you seen Elzar Mann? He was here just a few minutes ago. Stoke shook her head. I haven't seen him. Neither have I, Nib admitted, the others saying the same. You said something was wrong, Bell spoke up, Geos whirling. We'll help, Nib said, beckoning Engel over from where he was perusing a tray of spiced Rykert strips. Stellan's expression, not exactly disturbance in the Force, but a sense of unease, emanating from Elzar. I must find him. No, Stellan told the older woman. You must stay here. People will be concerned if we all leave at once. I'll go. He made for the door, nearly tripping over Ember, who insisted on trotting at his feet. Bell, could you? Bell apologized, again, and told Ember to sit. The dog ignored him, scurrying after Stellan. What was she doing? Looks Like someone has a new friend, Nib chuckled, watching the dog follow Geos out of the pavilion. Yes, because Stellan is such an animal lover, Indira replied. Hope he doesn't break the little lady's heart. I'd better get after them, Belle said, wishing he'd never come to the reception in the first place. This was the last thing he needed. He found Stellan standing in the fair's main thoroughfare, looking forward and then back as if trying to spot Elzar in the crowd. Belle couldn't help. He'd heard of Man, but had never laid eyes on the guy. Ember was hopping around like an excitable puppy at Stellan's feet, her tail wagging furiously. She barked as Belle hurried up, ready to pull her away if necessary. I'm sorry. I don't know what's gotten into her. We'll get out of way. No need. Hold this, will you? Stellan said, pulling his lightsaber from its holster and handing it to Belle. The Padawan looked at it in all of whiter Mudamuk oil. We've both been using it since we were Padawans. Stellan crouched down and offered Ember the leather. She sniffed, and then once again, and then scooted off into the crush of play. Stellan jumped up, the holster grasped in his hand, and took back his lightsaber before taking off after her. Once pet. Maybe I'm getting better with animals, he shouted back as he chased after them both. Proof you're never too old to learn. They would have run straight past Man if it weren't for Ember. Thee had followed the Charhound out of the fair park into the heart of Elnisa City itself, only for her to lose the scent at the last minute. Belle had felt Stellan reach out with the Force in an attempt to locate his old friend, but Ember had barked sharply and scurried around T Corner of a droid dealership that was making the most of so many tourists being in town. They pelted along a crowded side street A would have come bursting out of the other end, if Ember hadn't Henley skidded to a halt and barked sharply, looking up to the roof of one of the buildings. The street was illuminated by lanterns strung from building yielding, and yet the glow bulbs around this particular roof were oot. Stellan put a finger to his lips, then dipped into a narrow alley between the building in question and a noisy saloon. The Lake's RA4 Belle had gone after him. Ember at his heels, Stellan had on the ground to the roof, leapfrogging from one wall to the next you there, Belle told Ember before following the Count Ember, using a second-story windowsill to bounce up to the roof stay. Garstay spotted him crouched near the edge of the flat roof. A look of annoyance crossed his face, and he beckoned them over. What are you doing here? He hissed through gritted. Get down, for void's sake. We're looking for you, Stellan said as they scrambled down to where Man had been hiding, using the Force to mask his presence. Master Geo sensed something was wrong, Belle explained, choking slightly at the dust they had kicked up. Did he now? Man glared at Belle. And who are you? This is Padawan Zedifar, Stellan explained. Man grunted. Great Storm's apprentice. Just keep yourself covered. I don't want anyone to see that we're here. It's what he's waiting for that I'm interested in. Man pointed out an open window on the third floor of the cantina. A Solistan was deep in conversation with a heavy-set Orzvalanso with long drooping earlobes and shoulders that wouldn't have looked out of place on a Gamorrean. He attuned, Stellan breathed, as large as life. Which one? Belle asked, watching the Solistan pace around the thug in the suit. The small one, Elzar told him. The senator for Sullust and a royal pain in the backside. Stellan crossed his arms. Spoken like a true Jedi, Man shrugged. Look, I was sent to Valo to sweep for trouble, yes? Le jabbed a gloved finger at the Solistan. That guy has been on my cope ever since he crashed Samara's reception. The Force is telling me ease. Man blew out. Don't give me that. You said you sensed it. I sensed that you were troubled, not that Toon was up to no good. Ouch, thought Belle. That didn't sound like a loaded statement at all. What was going on between these two? You've been troubled for weeks. Something is coming, Man said gravely. I can feel it, you can feel it, and Zedifar could feel it if he weren't trying to close himself off from the Force. Man looked straight at him, and Belle felt his mouth go dry. What's that about anyway? I was injured recently, Belle stammered. knowing the explanation wouldn't hold water. I found connection to the force painful. At least that part was the truth, LL. Weak or not, man seemed to accept the excuse, or at least was too busy to worry about it right now. He turned back to Stellan. Toon is up to something. He's supposed to be at the outpost in an hour for the Chancellor's tour. We all are, Stellan reminded him. And yet he's here, Man continued, ignoring his superior, above this dive, with his bodyguard. What kind of senator needs a bodyguard anyway? Stellan peered over the edge of the building. I've seen worse. The bodyguard? The bar. Eldar snorted a short laugh. Because you're always hanging out in PKFAs. But whatever you think about it, this is the last place you pecked to find a senator. He said he had meetings. But with who? That's the question. If Toon has something to be screwing it tightly into, is that a listening device? Stellan asked as Man pointed the dish at the open window. We can't rely on the Force for everything, Man told him, adjusting a dial on the back of the unit. Neither are we secret police. Man shot a glance at Stellan's still pristine robes. Not wearing that you're not, Stellan looked like he was, about to retort, and then thought better of it. Elzar Man gave the dial another sharp twist, and the senator's voice crackled from the comlink. Bell's heart skipping when he heard what it said. Is that a lightsaber? Father had a large collection himself. Relics of the Sith Wars, no less, absolutely priceless. Fascinating. Do you still have them? Ventessa clasped her pristine hand in front of her. At least her sanitizer was safely stowed in her pocket. The unit's constant hiss was really getting on Ty's already fractured nerves. Sadly not, the Coranu continued, using the opportunity to direct the conversation back to the reason they were here. I sold them all to finance work. The blue crate was standing behind her on the repulsor sled that Ty had pushed, all the way from the dynamo, its contents surprisingly heavy. Of course, Toon said. The reason we are here, and you developed this yourself, working with my daughter, and she is on our ship. She's a clever girl, but nervous in crowds. I couldn't help but feel a little jealous. She would give anything to be back on the dynamo about now. Valo is particularly crowded at the moment, Toon said, looking eagerly at the crate. So, may we see? Naturally, Mentessa said, punching a code into the combination lock on the side of the crate. Ty couldn't help but be intrigued as the seals clicked open. Mentessa had explained what needed to happen, but not what to expect when the case swung open. The answer, it turned out, was not much. The device inside resembled a portable comm array or maybe even a moisture vaporator, albeit one smothered in exposed wiring and flashing diodes. That was what she was guarding? Toon obviously shared Ty's disappointment. I thought it would be a little more polished, he admitted, stroking his jowls. It is a prototype, Mentessa said quickly. A working prototype. Toon took a step forward, his Orzo muscle shifting beside him. Ty had already discounted the senator. Mentessa smiled, pulling a small remote from her sleeve. She pressed a button and the unit started whirring, lighting up like the dynamo's control console. The finished unit will be far less conspicuous, she explained. Not to mention much smaller, meaning it can be mounted on walls or roofs without drawing attention. I'm glad to hear it, Toon said, peering at the device, which, rather disconcertingly, was starting to steam. At its heart is a Ricanium core, Mentessa continued, unperturbed, which is currently spinning within a vortex chamber. Toon took a sharp step back, in which case you can turn it off. Ricanium is illegal, in every form, Toon insisted, and for good reason. Mentessa wasn't giving up. But as you will see, the 4-7 nullifier will be an excellent reason for the Senate to revisit that decision. Ty's stomach tensed. She knew what she was about to be asked to do and didn't like it, or the way the Orzo hand moved none too subtly to the bulge beneath his jacket. Turn it off, Toon insisted. Mantesa's eyes flashed with frustration. But you said you wanted a demonstration. She turned to Tai. If you would be so kind. Tai breathed out, snatching her lightsaber from her belt. The purple blade snapped on, and the Orzalanzo finally pulled his blaster, the Diot going so far as to squeeze off a bolt. This was not how this Hadeen meant to be. Tai swung, sending the energy slamming harmlessly into the wall. Ammon and Tai threw up. Stellan had been ready to jump the moment the lightsaber mentioned, but Elzar had held him back. Wait, we need to know what they are doing. But there had been no stopping the council member when the first shot had been fired. Stellan ran for the edge of the roof, using the force to leap farther than was humanly possible, rolling through the window to spring up, his own lightsaber already blazing. The senator was on the floor, blaster in hand, a Thalothian with an ignited lightsaber looming over him. Stellan took in the others in the room. Toon's hulking secretary slumped against a wall, and a Karana woman fielding what he assumed was the Racanium device. Drop the weapon, he instructed the Thalothian. She stood her ground, her blade buzzing menacingly. Only if you do the same. He almost laughed. Was she really calling him out? This is your last warning. For a second, she looked as though she was going to comply before Elzar and Bell leapt in behind him, their hands going for their own sabers. The Thalothian's response was immediate. She swept up her free hand, the fallen Orzalanzo crying out as he was plucked from the floor and crashed into Elzar and Bell, Elzar's lightsaber spinning from his grip. Then she went for Stellan, a purple blade sweeping in from the side. He parried the blow, going on the counterattack, but she was Eddie for him. Their blades clashed over and over, Stellan all too aware of their relatively cramped surroundings. Protect the senator, he ordered. Live. Everything all about her screamed Jedi. From the way she held her lightsaber to the raw talent of her form, although the snarl on her lips and frustration he felt at her core spoke of a life without discipline, far from the light. The dark side? No, they would have sensed that the moment they'd seen her. But if she had been trained, she had certainly veered from the path. Nothing proved this more than the moment when they found themselves in deadlock. Stellan's blade crossed against hers. Submit, he demanded, glaring at her across the hissing plasma. In response, she pulled back her head and clapped her metal skull cap hard across the bridge of his nose. He went down hard, dazed, only dimly aware of Bell coming to his aid. Without even pausing, the woman turned on Elzar, bringing her lightsaber around. Sensing the attack, Elzar brought his own blade up, using the Thalothian's momentum against her. The locked blades completed a perfect arc, Elzar slamming the tip of her saber into the ground. Elzar slid his blade up the length of hers, the plasma screeching as he aimed for her hands, but she realized what he was doing and ended a boot in his chest. Elzar was knocked flat against the wall as his strange-looking machine reached its crescendo, the whine almost unbearable. Stellan shouted out a warning, but the Thalothian struck, urine her saber up to its hilt in Elzar's chest. No! Stellan yelled, calling on the force to pull the woman away from him. She flew across the room, slamming into the wall, her lightburst spinning from her fingers. Bell raced to Elzar, who had his hand in his chest, but when the Padawan pulled it away, there was no hole, remaining locked. None of this made any sense. Padawan? Stellan asked, and Bell tried to light his own saber only to have the same result, or lack of it. Elzar's was the same, all three weapons incapacitated. It's the machine, the Thalothian hissed. It extinguished our blaze before I struck the killing blow, and knew that would happen, Eldar asked, pushing himself up. You, no, the woman scoffed, and Elzar took a step forward before stopping himself. Someone needs to explain what she means, Stellan demanded, his head thudding from the throb of his nose and the pulsing of the Kuranu's device. I agree, Toon said, stepping up to join Stellan, his eyes fixed on the woman. Only once you release my associate, you are in no position to make demands, Miss Chekat, the senator snapped. surprising all of them with the fury of his words. The woman raised her hands as if they could somehow protect her. Very well. The nullifier generates a frequency that can disrupt any from the humble blaster to, yes, the weapon of a Jedi. And why exactly would I be interested in such a device? Toon demanded. Energy weapon. The woman looked at him confused, as if the answer was obvious. Your opposition to the Jedi is well known, and the nullifier. Then why are you campaigning for the Defense Force? Stellan couldn't help but wonder himself. Because I believe the Republic should be able to defend itself without relying on the Jedi alone. Because, stars forbid, if anything happened to the Jedi, where would we be? He jabbed a finger at the nullifier. But this is Ricanium. You have brought an illegal substance onto a Republic world, I'm assuming, without the correct permits or permissions. Mentessa visibly swallowed. You thought that because you were meeting me, you were above the law. I'm afraid, Miss Chekhov, you are woefully mistaken. There was a clatter of footsteps from outside, followed immediately by the sudden arrival of armed Valo security officers. The lead officer took in the scene and turned instinctively toward Stellan. We received a report of an incident. Toon stepped forward, drawing the lawman's attention back to him. It arrived in the nick of time. I shall send my compliments to Captain Snat. He turned to face Chekat and her mysterious bodyguard. Arrest these two and impound their device. Stellan tried not to let his annoyance at being circumvented show. Senator Toon, all things considered, I think that the Jedi should handle this. I have no doubt you do, Council Member, but this is a Republic matter. These criminals came to me, breaking Republic rules in the process. They are my responsibility. He lifted his head, challenging Stellan to contradict him. Do you agree? Its holster. It turned his saber to. Although we would like to study this lightsaber, Elzar added as Stellan released Yorick into the security officer's supervision, the Thalothian, having the sense not to struggle as binders were snapped around her wrists. Be my guest, Toon said dismissively. Maybe you will share any information it proves about these criminals with the appropriate authorities. Stellan bowed magnanimously. Naturally. Thank you, Senator. Toon took a step forward, his voice dropping. No, thank you, Council Member. You jumped in to protect me, despite my reputation in the Senate, and it is appreciated, no matter what think of me. You. Stellan went to protest, but Toon waved the sentiment away. I meant what I said, Master Geos. We are allies. I just wish for the Republic to stand on its own feet from time to time, especially following the events of Hetzel. You do understand that, don't you? There was no duplicity in Toon's words. Stellan nodded, saying, We are all the Republic. Toon smiled. Indeed we are, Council Member. Indeed we are. The senator swept from the room, his Orzolanso aide limping after him. Mentessa was bundled out next, followed by Yorick, who called back over her shoulder. I'll need that back. Elzar didn't reply as the remaining security officers puzzled over what to do with the nullifier. Help them, Bell, Stellan said. We should get that thing off-world as soon as possible. Once, Master, Bell responded, although Stellan could tell he had 1,001 questions. He wasn't alone. Shall I go with them? Elzar asked. See what I can get out of Yorick? Stellan shook his head. We need to play by the rules. Toons, this is Republic business. But we're all the Republic, Elzar reminded him. Stellan. Elzar, I mean it, she's obviously Jedi, or at least used to be. Aren't you curious about that? Of course I am. But she isn't going anywhere. You honestly think a Valancel will hold her? The local detention center is more than capable of containing 5 Force users. But nothing. I mean it, Elzar. He pointed at the stains on Elzar's tabard. Go and get those checked out, says the man with the swollen nose. Stellan risked probing his own injury, wincing at the pain. Broken. Hell. You need to change your robes, Elzar snapped, storming from the room, Yorick's lightsaber still in his hand. I'll put this someplace safe, Stellan let him go. When Elzar was in this kind of mood, there was no talking to him, but he was right about something. His nose might not be broken, but it had bled all over his temple robes. He really hoped this wasn't the sign of things to come. Chapter 26. The Faith and Life Zone. The party was in full swing, and Kitrapso hated every minute. Everywhere he looked there, laughter and excitement, delighted faces and happy voices. Dancers from a dozen worlds whirled on stages across the park, riots of silk, ribbons, and bangles, while children pulled at their parents' hands, wanting to run in 7 different directions at once. The only place Kip wanted to run to was his mother's suite in the Hotel Republica. Mom had, of course, already given him the usual pep talk just after she'd unveiled his outfit for the evening. The Zeph silk jacket had come complete with a golden bloom pinned to his lapel. Since when had he worn flowers, not to mention pants with seams so sharp that they looked like they could blunt a lightsaber? Just look interested, she had said. That's all I ask. You sure about that? He asked, yanking at the collar of his shirt. She'd adjusted the fastening, smoothing it against his neck before resting a hand against his cheek. Okay, you can have that one. I know it's a lot, and I know you didn't want to come to Valo in the first place,